Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wolverine podcast here on Monday, June 23rd. Anthony Broom here with Clayton Safey. And if you're watching the video version, we both look like we're about to be on the golf course. We're not going to be on the golf course, but we are headed to the Club of Flint's event later today. Excited to maybe bring back some goodies from that. Thank you to those guys for the invite out there. But with this being Monday, we're going to do a bit of an abbreviated show, a mostly Q&A, and do a little football talk as we get into what is now the last full week of June. So again, we're not wishing summer away, but football season is quickly approaching. In a month from now, there will be Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas. So we are right on the doorstep. But Clayton, welcome back in.
Great to be here. The golf outing is going on right now. It's like, 90 some degrees. So good luck to everyone at the U of M Greater Flint alumni club who is playing in that. Yeah, wish we could have been out there, even though it is super hot. But we're just showing up for the afterwards, and should be a lot of fun there to mingle with some Michigan fans, and Michigan basketball coach, and some players as well. But it feels good out there for about 10 seconds, and then you get a little
there is
hot.
I've been out a few times, just taking out the trash, running out to water the plants or whatever, and there's that initial blast of warm air when you walk out of the AC, and you're like, man, it's not that bad out here. And then 10 seconds later, you're sweating. So
you get on hole 3, and you're like, what the hell?
Yeah. So hopefully the guys out there, you more than just mixed in a water today. Hopefully you mixed a couple waters in there but should be a good time. We'll be out there a little later this afternoon. This isn't live, but if we're broadcasting you from the future. It was great to see those of you who we ran into out there. We will start with an article you did today, Clayton, which was from the Lindy's football preview. It was good news, bad news for Michigan football heading into the 2025 season. So I believe this is a section right in their Big Ten preview page where they're talking about good news, bad news, bottom line for every single team. So they do a great preview. We love those preview mags. I'm heading to Europe next week for 2 weeks. So I've got probably 4 or 5 of those loaded up in my backpack, ready to dive in. And of course, we've done a lot of our work in the Michigan football preview, which, as far as I know, is off to the printer. That will be out sometime in mid-July. If you guys pre-ordered, that'll be in your mailboxes soon. But I'm going to start with the good news, Clayton, which you wrote here. Lindy says, good news. The passing game is fixed with the addition of top-rated freshman Bryce Underwood and Fresno State transfer Mikey Keene, transfer wideouts Donovan McCulley and Anthony Simpson from Indiana and UMass, respectively, can be counted on for productive seasons. I think for one of those guys, you can for sure count on a productive season. It seems like Donovan McCulley is right now the closest thing this team has to a bona fide number 1 wide receiver. Simpson's a little more interesting. We've talked about him before on here.
Yeah. But to me, like the fixed part has everything to do with the quarterback position. They could have ran it back with the same group of receivers they had a year ago, but with these quarterbacks that they now have on the roster, and it would look completely different. And I wrote right under, quoting Lindy's there, that it's going to feel like a breath of fresh air, even if it's not a dynamic passing attack, even if it's not an above average, power 4 passing attack, even if it's just average, which I think they have much more upside than that. But I'm just trying to give it a baseline here as we look at it. I think it's going to look so much better. And then you add in the fact that you did bring in some guys who might be able to take it to another level from what we saw a year ago from a pass catching standpoint. Now you lost Colston Loveland, so that hurts. But wide receiver wise, I don't think you can get much worse. I mean, Tyler Morris was your leading receiver and he left, but he wasn't very productive. And there were times too last year where guys were somewhat open, but the quarterbacks couldn't find them. So again, I think to me, it comes so much down to the quarterback play and what Bryce Underwood's going to bring. And if it's Mikey Keene at different points in the season, what he could bring as well, because it was just so subpar, beyond subpar what we saw, about as bad as it gets. And it's not a knock on any individual because they did their best and they were the ones thrown in there. But it's just so beyond anything we thought was really possible. Because, Anthony, I bring this up a decent amount, but you and I and Chris doing these podcasts last summer at the same time, we would get some questions in our mailbag saying, well, if we're Iowa on offense, but we have a great defense, what can we be? And we would laugh that off and say, there's no way they're going to be Iowa. And guess what? They were worse. So it was that bad offensively. I have a stat for you. I just need to double check and pull up real quick that illustrates this. But I think it's just going to be a completely different ballgame when you think about a quarterback that can just make more throws, and that is going to be able to see the field a little bit better. And, you're going to go through growing pains with a freshman if it is Underwood out there, but still, I think it's going to be a lot better than what we saw last year. And that's going to open up everything with this entire offense.
Well, and the stat too, as you look up your stat, the one that always stuck out to me was they were the only team in FBS last year without a passing play of 40 or more yards, which that's your scheme and your production was so bad. You couldn't even benefit off of a busted coverage or anything like that. That's all it takes is one. And oftentimes, there's multiple plays that are to be had there, even if you're below average. So it was much worse than we ever could have imagined. It gives me a lot more skepticism heading into the season. But you look at the chemical mixture of what they have with, at the very least, like we know that Bryce Underwood's final form, I don't think we're going to see this season. So you temper expectations there. But with what we think he can be mixed with the known commodity that a guy like Mikey Keene is, and even to a certain extent, he's an unknown commodity because all of his production has come at the group of 5 level. But the bar is we're going to look back in a few years on that passing game and from last year and be like, how did it ever get that bad? And I already feel that way, but that by so many metrics, and when you look at the totality of the circumstances last year, that might be the worst passing game Michigan's had since the forward pass has been, a notable part of the offense. So,
well, can I give you my number? Because this number is the worst in program history in a category that I want you to guess. And it includes the years that we're talking about where teams didn't really pass much. The number is 8.8. What do you think that number is correlated to from last season?
8.8. I mean, it's not yards per attempt.
That would be good.
That's for sure. that would be elite. Usually anything over 7 is pretty darn good. Is it average yards? Is it yards per reception for everyone?
Yeah, it's yards per completion, which is the same thing as yards per reception. 8.8, lowest in program history for a season. The second lowest was 2008, the infamous 2008 season, and that was 10.4.
Yeah.
Okay, that was 1.6 points higher. So, I mean, that's just one stat because, you're looking at yards per attempt. I agree. Like, that is mostly what I go off of when I look at, if I had to pick one stat, right? Of course, you take the whole picture and you look at multiple different statistics, but that is the main one for me. But that just shows just how everything was just such a slog last year offensively when you had to go through the air. And even the Ohio State game, which I think I mentioned last week, it was on Father's Day night. It was Michigan Day on BTN. And I'm sitting there watching it with my dad, and we were laughing at how even those long drives that Michigan kept alive late in the second half that were crucial, even the one that ended in a Davis Warren interception was massive because they took off, I think, close to 9 minutes off the clock. But the first downs they got were like right at the marker. It was by by the nose of the football. Everything was just such a struggle. So, and even we saw a little bit of it in the spring game with Underwood, and we'll see Mikey Keene when he gets out there this fall. Like, it's just a kind of a different animal when you have a guy like that back there. Now, what I also went on to write in this article was there's a chance he's 2018 Trevor Lawrence, true freshman, and is just unbelievable. One of the best freshman seasons we can ever remember. It's not likely to happen. So if he's not that, then he's going to need a lot to go right around him. And, there are some questions about some of the things around him, like the receiving core, like the offensive line. But at the very least, it's just going to look completely different offensively through the air.
Yeah, Trevor Lawrence's freshman season. And mind you, I think Kelly Bryant started the first 3 or 4 games that year.
Something like that, yeah.
He threw for 3,280 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. That's not happening. And if it does, holy crap, did they ever hit the jackpot with that guy? Trevor Lawrence stepped into an infrastructure that was a lot more Trevor Lawrence and freshman quarterback friendly, I think. And I think for Michigan to max out what Bryce Underwood can do as a freshman, I mean, obviously you want him to be closer to Trevor Lawrence on that scale than, I'll compare a local guy, the last 5-star guy to come out of Michigan. Dante Moore started a couple games his freshman year at UCLA, and it was a roller coaster. And Dylan Raiola last year at Nebraska was a roller coaster. DJ Lagway last year, bit of a roller coaster at times. So you kind of have to bake in this expectation that if they put a decent amount on this guy's plate, there are going to be mistakes that are made. But still, I'd rather make a mistake with Bryce Underwood chucking the ball 50 yards down the field than, not being able to throw the forward pass at all. So by virtue of that, Michigan just in a much healthier place at quarterback in the passing game than they were last year. And that doesn't mean they're where they like to be. That doesn't mean they're where they're going to be, but it is a much better place to be as you continue to peel back the layers and build on what was a pretty good end to last season. Let's move to the bad news from the Lindy's preview. Clayton, they write, and you wrote in your article, Michigan replaces 2 first-round picks on the defensive line, Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. And the secondary loses multi-year leader Will Johnson, Donovan Edwards, and Khalil Mullings. Take with them 1,527 yards rushing and double-digit touchdowns to the NFL. I want to start with the running backs in that discussion first, because we'll just set it at this number. They ran for 1,527 yards last year. Michigan's running back duo of Jordan Marshall, Justice Haynes, I assume we think is going to be 1A, 1B. If there's a 1A guy there, it probably does skew towards Jordan Marshall, who I think has a chance to be kind of the engine of this offense, at least for this season. How do we feel about these two guys and backfilling the production lost from those guys that are in the NFL now?
Better than I felt about last year's duo. And that was a pretty good duo because Khalil Mullings came on and became a really dominant force at times, kind of tailed off in the middle of the season and then had a resurgence and unfortunately got hurt. Well, just a warrior-like performance against Ohio State. But Donovan Edwards wasn't as consistent as you wanted him to be. Still ripped off some big runs early in the year, Washington, USC, that really helped you out. But I feel really good about the running back duo. And to go off of what I think you were leading into there, I'll go the over on 1,527 yards, 1,527, because, in part of that depends on health. And, 1,100 of it could be one guy and the other guy gets hurt or something like that. But I still see this duo going over that mark. And guess what? The pass game is going to help the run game. So I don't see that as a bad news. And we wrote about, how even them losing Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, you can also, of course that's bad news. Like everyone in the country wants those players, but you can also figure out a way to mitigate those losses. You bring in more depth. You have a bunch of guys, 6 guys, 296 plus pounds at D tackle that are going to rotate through and stay fresh. It's not going to be as good as it was, but you can still be good and then have other things around that are better to help those guys out and overall be a better front seven, better defense. So, that part of it is not going to be a one-to-one replacement, but the running backs kind of will be with 2 other guys that I think might be a better overall duo. And that's saying a lot because Khalil Mullings was a good running back that ended up getting drafted and was, I think had his moments, probably should have gotten the ball more in some of those games in the middle of the year.
Absolutely should have. And it really comes down to that. Do you think that, and this isn't a knock on the guys that are leaving, but do you think that those 2 guys can be better than what ultimately wound up being a 6th round pick and a undrafted free agent by the time their college careers are done? I think they can be with good health and some good fortune. So I don't see that as bad news. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, me too.
Addressing the Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, obviously we feel like you don't have, it's hard to find a one-to-one replacement for first round picks unless
top 13 picks. Yeah.
Unless you're Georgia and Alabama of 5-6 years ago, where you're just getting all of these guys and you're backfilling those types of guys on your roster. I think they got a pretty good lead guy in Rayshon Benny. I think they're a lot deeper there than they were last year. That deeper doesn't mean better, but oftentimes we talk about, something that struck me about last season was, you were so top heavy with talent with Colston Loveland at tight end, Will Johnson when he was healthy at cornerback, the 2 guys we just mentioned at defensive tackle. Now I feel like the depth, maybe the high end talent isn't quite as there, but I think that depth is kind of spread out now through the roster. And if there's a guy that is a 1-to-1 replacement concern, or even a little bit less than that, a bit less than that, is there a number one cornerback on this roster? I think that's the number one question on defense for me, kind of with a bullet right now.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think the depth there too, because guys go down in the secondary. I think your third corner right now, if I were to project it, and it might not be this way on the current depth chart, but it might end up being that way at the end of fall camp or early in the season, that a true freshman in Shamari Earls might be your third best option at corner. And that you have a guy in Zeke Berry who probably played better at outside corner late in the year than he did at nickel. But he's more of a nickel by trade. If he got drafted, I think you'd probably move him inside, and that's probably a year or two away. Then he's one of your starting corners. And then Jair Hill, a guy who kind of had an up and down season, is also one of your starting corners. So that's a little bit of a concern. But we do have proof that they can actually piece this together, and that is because we saw it at the end of last season, and Will Johnson didn't play really the second half of the year. So I think that helps. And then safeties help corners a lot. A good nickel helps corners out a lot, and they have, I think, a lot of good safety depth. I would add another question I have about the defensive line is how good actually is really good or is good. Like, you feel good about the defensive line and the front seven as a whole, but is it top 5 in the country? Like a lot of people think it could be. Is the edge duo, like Sharon Moore said, find me another edge duo that's better in the country? Is it actually that good? TJ Guy and Derek Moore, probably not quite that good, but is it top 5? That would be good enough, I think, to also help out the back end of the defense too. So that defense is going to be good. I have a feeling that Wink Martindale is just going to figure out a way to stop opponents, and they won't be playing catch up like they were last season early in the year, where they weren't just quite ready, or they didn't have the communication down enough to compete in some of those games like Texas. But then they figured it out towards the end of the year. So that bodes well, because a lot of those guys are back that gained some of that confidence at the end of the season and were big parts of that Alabama win.
And I think a big part of why things clicked for them on the defensive side of the ball last year at the end of the year was, I think it was due to injury, and certainly due to some of the things that were, Jair Hill demoted for a bit at cornerback. They decided to simplify things, and I think it allowed everyone to play faster. Now, you could take your knowledge of that, where you've mastered this and you're playing fast, and maybe they do stack on a few more wrinkles now, because you feel like the guys there that have been in this system have a better grasp of it. So it's going to be interesting to see how they work that dynamic. The bad news section goes on to say that Chip Lindsey and the Michigan offense hold the keys to a college football playoff berth. And I don't think that's all that debatable. I think that that is the defining storyline of this season.
It pretty much is. Remember, we talked about this a month or two ago when Joel Klatt said, I'm a believer in Michigan. And it has nothing to do with Bryce Underwood. It has nothing to do with the offense. It has everything to do with the defense. And then if the offense is good, then it unlocks the keys. It unlocks everything, right? It's the key to unlocking a potential college football playoff team, a potential team that can make a run in the college football playoff. If you get a good matchup, or a quarterback goes down like Georgia had last year that helped Notre Dame out, then you can make a run if you stay healthy, if you get the breaks. So I think all you need to do is get in. And if you have an adequate offense, you should with that defense. It's going to help the defense too. It's amazing that the defense finished as high as it did in some of these stats with having no offense last season. Looking it up as we speak, 19th in scoring defense? Let me look at total defense here. 10th in total defense with no offense. How is that even possible? So, and that was with 6 games of kind of being an up and down defense. If you remember after the Illinois game, that whole Sunday, Monday, all that, the fallout from it, they wanted Wink Martindale gone as much as they wanted Kirk Campbell gone. I didn't think that was fair at the time. Although, it was frustrating. And really that was unfair. I guess I would say maybe after Washington, because the defense did its job against Illinois, but and maybe Oregon, you saw some of that, and then they really put the clamps on at the end of the year. But to finish that high with that rocky of a start is really impressive. So if the offense can give them some help, I mean, you're talking about a potentially really, really good team. But and the schedule helps too, because you do avoid Oregon and Penn State.
And I'll wear some of that. I'll wear this as well. I think there were probably a couple post game shows, at least one, from out front at Regents Field, where I'm like, I'm not so sure you might not need 2 new coordinators next year. And obviously, one guy did his part to keep his job, and the other guy ultimately lost his job. So, I mean, credit to Wink Martindale and the guys too. I mean, that's the players stayed bought in. We've seen Michigan teams before where they're just like, this guy doesn't have the answers and we don't know what to do out here. They worked together to find out something that worked. And it wasn't fair what was put on the defense's plate last year, specifically in games like the Indiana game, the Washington game, 2 games where I'm like, those are just games you needed to find ways to win. So any other thoughts on this? I feel like we kind of did give away your whole article, but it is a good article. You should head over to thewolverine.com and read it. Any other final thoughts from that?
There's a little more there going into like kind of Sharon Moore early tenure stuff that we'll probably hit on and have hit on throughout the off season. So yeah, people can go check it out. But just back to the coordinator topic, I remember texting a fan who I will not out on this pod. I think it was after the Oregon game. It was after a home game because I was sitting in the press room writing after the game, after the press conference was over. And like I got a text that said both coordinators need to go. And I said, who do you want fired more? Like if you had to choose one. And the answer I think was Wink, which is just crazy. And that same person doesn't still hold that belief now, obviously. But it's just interesting, like that's how much they flipped that defense at the end of the year. It probably is unfair to, maybe we were living too much in the moment and it was one play here, one play there that I think frustrated people. And again, they had no help from the offense, so there was no margin for error for them. But that just shows you how much better they got throughout the course of the year, how much it really clicked into high gear at the end of the season. And then you end the year, and Wink put out that tweet on January 1, the day after they beat Alabama. He's, like, great year, looking forward to year 2, # building a bully. And like every Michigan fan in the world retweeted that. And it was like, we love Wink and everything else. So, and they should. Wink's an amazing defensive coordinator. And him in year 2, not having to learn guys' names in January and February and the rest of the staff being together, because that was a new staff last season all together on the defensive side, that's going to go a long way. So I'm really excited to see it. I think Wink's the man. And he's one of the reasons, like, he's got Joel Klatt believing. He's got a lot of us believing that Michigan could be very good. We'll see if they are. But that defense, I think, should be solid.
Yeah, it just goes to show, don't be too bogged down in planting a flag. And well, unless you win at Ohio State. But sometimes you just got to give it up for a guy who, at one point, everyone was out on Jim Harbaugh. They rally. Now he's considered a legend. Everyone was out at some point. I wouldn't say everyone, but a lot of people out on Wink Martindale to a lesser extent. Guy does a great job at the end of the year. And oftentimes through struggles, the only way out of them is to win through them. And to Michigan's credit, they found a way to do that.
I deleted those texts, by the way. So we're all good.
Good. I'm glad you were able to get to that. How about we take some questions here?
Let's do it.
Before we close things out, we will go to Blue Monster, who he likes to throw some numbers at us. And I like this question a lot. He says, in 2023, the passing game was 40% of the plays and 56% of the yards. In 2024, the passing game was 39% of the plays and 42% of the yards. It says, note the same mix of rushing and passing plays in each year. And then he goes on to ask, will the passing game in 2025 be A, noticeably more than 40% of the plays, B, about the same mix, or C, noticeably less than 40%?
I was actually going to bring that stat up, that 8.8, for this question, but we burned it earlier. I mean, it's amazing that 39 to 42 split that he's talking about, because 40% to 56, I think, is a lot more ideal for a program like Michigan. And obviously that was the most ideal season you could get, 15-0. But I'm going to say not noticeably more than 40% of the plays. I think it could be less, could be around 39. I mean, 40, 39 in the last 2 years. So it seems like it's going to be right around there. Although you do hear that Chip Lindsey wants to, pass the ball a little bit more. I think that in terms of the yards, if he's also wanting that answer, I think it's going to be a hell of a lot more than 42%.
Yeah.
I would hope that would be the goal, right? To get that split a little wider, because again, yards per completion 8.8 even is terrible. That would be great yards rushing. So you want that split to be a little different than 39 and 42.
I'll say it about the same. I don't know what would count as noticeably more or noticeably less. Maybe 5% in either direction to me would be noticeably more or less, but it'll be about the same. I don't know. I think the chunk of the yards, like that 56%, is probably, I'd probably go a little lower than that, but I certainly think they'll be at or above 50% when it comes to passing production. So,
and the other thing to point out is, like, it's kind of funny how they had they had games where they had a guy back there that they didn't even want to throw on 3rd and 11, and it was 39% compared to 40 the year before. What does that tell you? In 2023, Michigan had leads, and in 2024, they didn't have leads. And I would be interested to see, and we can look it up, passing plays versus running plays when J.J. McCarthy was in. That split would be different. Yeah. Because they did throw it a little bit more. Let me I got PFF up here. J.J. McCarthy, 826 snaps, 381 of them were passing plays, and let's see, some quick math tells me that 445, if that's right, were running plays. So you still had a little more running, but they had some massive leads in those games. They would just jump on teams early, Nebraska, Minnesota, that stretch where they just started to blow everyone out. So that definitely skews those numbers a little bit.
Their starters didn't play in the fourth quarter until like mid-November, until that Penn State game, I think it was. So, and they didn't throw the ball at all in that game, which is kind of funny too. God, just an awesome. I go back to that one. I haven't gone back to that one as much as obviously Rose Bowl, National Championship, Ohio State. Those are the big three from that year, but that Penn State game was such a statement and such a middle finger. It was just so fun.
A great watch.
We're both in lockstep there, about the same 40-ish% of the plays. Let's go to this one from CT Blue 72, who says, assuming a blowout win versus New Mexico, do you still leave Bryce Underwood in the game to the very end just to get as many game reps as possible? Or are you passing / running your offense still for the same reason? Or are you going to hold back the playbook, just handing the ball off every down at that point and getting Underwood out of there to be healthy and ready to go for Oklahoma?
It's a great question. I think ideally I would leave him in for a pretty long time. And it all depends on like how big the blowout is, how much time is actually left. But Mikey Keene could use some reps too if he's healthy, and you want to get him some reps in a winged helmet here to kind of get that cohesiveness in game as well. So that's going to be a tough balance and tough decision for those coaches. Now, you hope you have that decision to make, that you're up 30, 40 points, something like that. That's a great problem to have. But speaking of Oklahoma, I've always had the theory that I've talked about here, where Oklahoma would just play those weak Big 12 defenses all year long and have these under Lincoln Riley and have these incredible passing stats. And they're throwing deep balls all the time, and they got the timing down. It was weak opponents, but it kind of translated once they played better teams. Now, they never had the defense really to win those CFP games. They went to 3 in a row. They lost all 3, but they were competitive, and they actually scored points in at least 2 out of 3. Went to overtime against Georgia and won. And part of the reason why, they had great talent, but I feel like throughout the year they got the timing down. They built that chemistry, and then when it came time to do it against better opponents, it was there. So I would like to see Bryce Underwood stay in, maybe them run the regular offense for a little bit longer than maybe you would with the normal quarterback. But then again, you want other guys to be ready too, because you don't want Mikey Keene to not have played at all if he does have to come in against Oklahoma. If he didn't play the week before, that's going to be a tough challenge.
Blue Monster, going back to him, he had a good question on last week's show that I wound up writing about late in the week in terms of, when this Oklahoma game comes around, how much of the offense will they have installed, or how much of it will be available to him? And that's impossible to know. So you just kind of look back at the sorts of schedule that other coaches, other teams have been on. Nick Saban and Kirby Smart have said, with experienced teams, they would often go into the season with 100% of their playbook completely installed and ready to roll. Whereas, or even think about Michigan in 2023, Sharon Moore and JJ McCarthy had an entire season to work together. And then you had the entire offseason to install and tweak and whatever you need to do. So that team was probably closer to 100%. So for Michigan and Underwood, I think what I wound up saying is that by the time the season starts, given that it's a new scheme, it's a fresh, likely you have a freshman quarterback starting, they might only have 70% of the playbook in, or, they will have, I do think to a certain extent, it will be pared down to the meat and potatoes of what they're good at. And then you keep layering on as the season goes on. So that'll be interesting. And maybe how long he stays in that game is dependent on, what they're trying to master before they unlock some of the maybe the bigger tricks and schematic stuff down the road. So it'd be pretty impressive if they had anything more than 70 or 80% in there, but it's tough to know too, because it's kind of a unique team and a unique season. You don't often see a new coordinator come in, installing a scheme from the ground floor with a likely true freshman starting at quarterback. So this is going to be pretty fascinating, I think.
And they may not know what percentage they're even at that point, because you got to know throughout the year, like how much you can add, or you don't know how much you can add. But yeah, it is interesting. How much will they want to show? How much will they not want to show? If it were Jim Harbaugh, they probably wouldn't show much. Sharon's probably from a similar camp, but they also, it's the balance of repetition in game versus, kind of that edge of the unknown that you're trying to hold back and keep Oklahoma guessing. And Oklahoma has a cupcake week 1 too as well. So I think them having a new offensive coordinator, a new quarterback, they may do a little bit of that too. Who do they have? They have Illinois State, I believe it is. So no offense to Illinois State. I don't think they're going to be a great team this year, at least to compete with these teams. So it could be a little chess match in week 1 for those two teams.
It could be. We'll see what happens. And again, if Michigan has, Michigan could have 100% of its playbook installed, but it could be a watered down playbook compared to what they might go to next season with. So there are too many moving parts to kind of nail that down. But I think it all plays a factor as to how long they choose to play him in week 1. I think we're going to close out with this one from Sasquatch 616. He says, if you had to choose between, this is a recruiting question, but we're going to put our recruiting guy hats on right now. He says, if you had to choose between getting a commitment from Savion Hyder or a commitment from 3 of the high-level defensive linemen that visited last weekend, which way do you go? I know what the engine of these good Michigan teams has been these last few years, and it normally involves a strong running game. But man, oh man, if you can control the line of scrimmage with an elite defensive line, if you're telling me I can have 3 of those guys instead of the 1, sorry, I'll take the defensive lineman.
Yeah, all 3. I'm going D-line as well, and here's why. I think it's much harder to get an elite defensive lineman from the transfer portal later on than it is to get one guy to sign up like a Justice Haynes and say, do you want to run the Michigan offense? Like, do you want to be the guy toting the rock behind what is usually a really good offensive line next to what is now a really good quarterback at Bryce Underwood, who, was obviously committed before Justice Haynes signed with Michigan, committed back in December. And that's just one example of they've been able to get that guy at running back in the last, 6-7 months. So I'll go with the history there. Now you can get some maybe guys like Damon Payne, Trey Williams, who were okay at their previous schools and for different reasons didn't play as much. They weren't starters. Williams dealt with injury throughout his entire time there. Damon Payne, just never really rose to the level maybe people thought he was going to be, and also had a lot of talent ahead of him too. You got to mention that. So I'll say it's just easier. Like, I'd rather have 3 elite defensive linemen, and the 3 defensive linemen, I assume he's talking about one of them, Carter Meadows, the 5-star edge who was on campus, as well as I think at least 1 D tackle, right? And Titan Davis, who they're starting to get a lot of buzz that he's going to end up at Michigan, top 110 recruit at the, I believe, the edge position that is trending towards Michigan. So those would be, I would love to land those three.
Absolutely. But on the same token, I'll be greedy and say I'm pretty enticed by the next couple of years. It includes Bryce Underwood at quarterback, Savion Hyder at running back, along with what they already have. And seem to be some good buzz. Go to our site. Our Ethan McDowell has a nice report on 5-star wide receiver Calvin Russell, who Michigan seemed to make a move with. So we know they need receivers, and they have a chance at a pretty good one here. So
I want them all, Anthony.
Yeah, I mean,
if we had to pick.
I want to be the kid hopped up on sugar, goes to Toys R Us. I don't even know if those exist anymore. I don't think they do. And you just wipe everything off the shelf into the shopping cart. That would be a lot of fun. So we're in an era where I think talent more than anything else matters. So just getting many talented players.
Did you see Calvin Russell's photo shoot at all?
I did not.
He's got one. He's wearing the Hoops jersey. I was thinking, is he going to play both or what? Or is this just for fun?
Well, maybe we'll,
he looks awesome.
We could ask later. We might have a chance to do that. But yeah, always cool to see those guys. Calvin Russell's rocking the number 1 jersey in the picture I see here on our site. Oh, there it is. There it is. That's pretty sweet.
He's doing it for fun. He's got buffs on. But if you're, I'm surprised Dusty hasn't seen Lugard at Ekpai walking around campus and be like, I think he could be a 4 for us. But
maybe he has.
Maybe he has.
Oh man, what do you think? I think let's get over to the golf course. We have a quiche in the oven, so to speak. So,
absolutely.
Be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more shows. We actually kept our word today, a little bit shorter than usual, but you guys if you want to read Clayton's article that we discussed, if you want to read Ethan McDowell, his report on Calvin Russell, EJ just posted a 5-star update on Edge Carter Meadows. If you want to be able to do that, use that promo code UM1. That gets you 2 months of access to our site for a single $1. Still the best deal in America. Take advantage of that today. For Clayton Safey, for our producer Megan behind the scenes, I'm Anthony Broom. Guys, thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you again later this week.